It's Ramsey Dewey over here in Southern California. I am traveling. I'm not in Shanghai today. I'm in the United States. But we're going to do Q&A with the coach because we have a question from our friend Laszlo who wants to know, he says this: I wonder if you could make a video on how and why many BJJ schools don't teach throwing techniques. Thank you. That's an astute observation. Many jiu-jitsu schools don't teach throws and takedowns, or at least aren't heavily invested in the stand-up wrestling, takedown, judo aspect of jiu-jitsu. And there's a very simple reason for that. In jiu-jitsu competition, you score 2 points for a takedown, you score 2 points for a sweep. Explain that to anyone who has been a competitive judo player for a significant amount of time. And they'll ask you, if they're being honest, why would you go for a throw if it scored the same as a sweep? Why wouldn't you just pull guard and work for a sweep? Well, hey, guess what? That's what happens 80% of the time in jiu-jitsu competitions. For the simple reason that that is how it's scored. The way you score a match is going to determine how the sport is played. It's very simple. I've got an upcoming podcast with Dan Lukart. It's 4 hours long. Dan is one of my favorite jiu-jitsu people on this planet. He's super knowledgeable. His jiu-jitsu IQ is way up there, man. It's way up there. This is something I'm really looking forward to showing you. Dan does not do a lot of interviews, and he discusses this at length. The scoring aspect, the takedown aspect, the guard pulling aspect of competitive jiu-jitsu. So if you want all the nuances, stay tuned for that one. It's good, okay? But if you want a very simple, straightforward answer, look, if it still doesn't make sense, you score 2 points for the takedown, 2 points for the sweep. Most people in jiu-jitsu competitions pull guard. If you don't know what that means they get a hold of their opponent, they get a grip, either on their uniform or their person, and they sit down on the floor and they work for a sweep or a submission from the bottom. And that's a viable way to play jiu-jitsu. The rules don't penalize that behavior. So why wouldn't you if you have a good guard game? When you pull guard, you are essentially sacrificing top position for more time to play on the bottom. So let's say it's a 5-minute round, 5-minute match, okay? And how long does it take you to get a takedown? It could take a while. If you're up against a competent wrestler, and maybe you're a competent wrestler too, that could go back and forth for a while, maybe a couple of minutes before you get that takedown. Now you got 3 minutes left on the clock to work for position, points, and a potential submission. In jiu-jitsu matches where the guard pull happens within the first 10 seconds, you've got, let's say, 4 minutes and 50 seconds to grapple, to work for the submission. Submissions are still pretty rare. They're still pretty rare in that time frame in a jiu-jitsu tournament. Why? It's kind of tough to submit an evenly matched opponent, and that's the goal of a tournament. Match people up with evenly matched opponents. It's not going to be an easy fight. We're not going to see a whole lot of boom, highlight reel moves where a super high-level guy is just styling on a low-level guy, because we've got evenly matched opponents with some notable exceptions. So the majority of jiu-jitsu players, what do? They put all their skill points into the ground game because they understand that's where they're going to be spending most of their time. And if they're guard pullers, that's where they are choosing to spend most of their time. So that's about it, man. That is about it. At the same time, I would strongly encourage jiu-jitsu schools to start on the feet, even if you're guard pullers. Because again, my friend Dan, at his school, at Brea Jiu-Jitsu, they always start on the feet. They're guard pullers for the most part, but they start on the feet. Why? Because that's how a jiu-jitsu tournament starts, on the feet. And being able to get the grips you want and get the exact position you want, bottom or top, that is a specialized skill set. Being able to do it within the time frame that you want. Let's say you're a good guard player and you're really good at tying somebody up from the bottom, sweeping them, controlling them, but you need specific grips. And the other guy doesn't want you to have those specific grips. And you have never practiced starting from your feet, grabbing those specific grips. And then you just waltz into a tournament, having started every roll on your knees, thinking, well, I'll just pull guard because takedowns are too dangerous to practice in my gym, or because I just don't feel like it. If you don't feel like it, that's okay. You don't have to be a wrestler in a jiu-jitsu tournament. That's okay. But what you do need to do is practice your very specific entry for your starting position, because that starting position is going to make or break you. If you have a strong starting position, there's a high possibility you're going to win. And if you don't, that chance goes down a lot. Should jiu-jitsu schools train takedowns? Yes, they should. I believe they should. But there's time limits. We're always working with time limits, man. How long is the average jiu-jitsu class? An hour and a half, 2 hours maybe on the more extreme part? How do most jiu-jitsu schools allocate their time? Most start with a 20-minute warm-up. You'll notice Dan at Brea Jiu-Jitsu doesn't start with that warm-up shrimping across the mat and doing calisthenics. No, jump straight into technique, drilling and sequencing technique. How about that? You warm up for jiu-jitsu with jiu-jitsu, kind of like when you warm up for weightlifting, you warm up with the bar with weightlifting, but at a scalable level. That kind of makes a lot of sense to me. So we have a 20-minute warm-up in the average jiu-jitsu school. And then we do, 20, 30 minutes of drilling or sequencing a technique. We learn the technique of the day, rep it out a whole bunch of times, and then we roll. We do sparring. And most jiu-jitsu schools that I've attended, and I've visited a lot of jiu-jitsu academies, start on their knees. And you can explain the logic to me. I've heard it all before. I don't need to hear it again, but I'm sure you'll explain it to me. But I would say your logic is invalid, because what happens on the knees is not what happens in a jiu-jitsu tournament. And if you're being honest with yourself, it's not the same technique you're practicing, not the same entries. It's different. There's some crossover because there's similarities between starting on the knees and what will happen on the ground. But if you believe it's the same, you're cheating yourself out of an authentic experience. And you're cheating yourself out of excellence. So, takedowns are also different. You probably heard the term like wrestling for MMA, wrestling for jiu-jitsu or something like that. And what people usually mean when they say these words like wrestling for MMA is like crappy wrestling. What that really should mean, wrestling in the context of MMA, let's say like a double leg takedown in the context of MMA, means you are probably going to be shooting for a double leg on somebody who is trying to hit you while standing up. Wrestling for a jiu-jitsu tournament is going to be very different. Why? Because you are attempting a double leg against somebody who is attempting to pull guard on you 80% of the time. And so that strategy is going to be radically different. Your setup, your timing, the things you're watching out for are going to be radically different. You're going to have to hide your collar, hide your sleeves, try to mitigate the grip fighting instead of focusing on the strikes and getting the dude's guard up so you can shoot under it. Different entries. You're probably going to have to get lower. And it's It's a specificity that is specific to jiu-jitsu tournaments that might actually disappoint you if you are intending this to cross over into some other realm. It might. And it might not, because it's such a level of specificity that you probably have to be a pretty dang good freestyle wrestler to hit those entries that fast against a good guard puller who really knows what's up with getting the grips they want as fast as they need to. So it's a bit of a cycle. We have jiu-jitsu players who are not taught takedowns. They don't invest the skill points or the time into the takedowns. Speaking of time, we didn't even finish that discussion about time. Let's circle back. So we got a 20-minute warm-up. We got 20, 30 minutes spent on technique, and then we roll or we spar. And there's little to no time spent on takedowns. You might have Takedown Tuesday or something like that. Whoop-de-doo. If you practice takedowns once a month, you probably won't be very good at it. Once a week, marginally better. If you dedicate time to it every day, you're going to be pretty decent after a while. But it is a question of time. Time is precious. And as far as the sport of jiu-jitsu goes, you have to ask some serious questions. What are the most viable options for winning? And for a lot of people, high-level takedowns don't factor into that equation, because in a jiu-jitsu tournament, they don't have to. So I hope that answers your question. If you have questions, please leave them in the comments down below. Thank you for watching. Now get out there and train.